The Central Valley of California is rich in Native American history, with several tribes calling this region home. Here are a few of the prominent tribes from the Central Valley. Originally from Central California, the Yokuts, formerly known as Mariposas, are a Native American ethnic group. Up to 60 tribes that spoke various related languages made up the Yokuts prior to European contact. Although common, Yokut is incorrect. Yokuts is both singular and plural. Only when referring specifically to the Tachi Yokut tribe of Lemoore should Yokut be used. Some of their descendants reject the term Yokuts, claiming it is an exonym created by English-speaking settlers and historians, and instead prefer to call themselves by their respective tribal names. Conventional subgroupings include the Foothill Yokuts, Northern Valley Yokuts, and Southern Valley Yokuts. The Yokuts were also referred to as Mariposans. Yokuts is an endonym that literally means people. Various tribes tell different stories about the origins of the Yokuts and their land, but most of them take a similar shape. According to their creation story, the world was once entirely submerged underwater. Then a crow and an eagle appeared. They saw a duck while they were flying and asked it to bring up mud from the water so they could land again. When the duck complied, the Yokuts, more especially the Coast Mountains and the Sierra Nevada, were born out of this mud. The eagle and the crow are still used as symbolic animals in Yokuts' religious rituals today. Okit's life was quite tranquil. At the time of contact with the Spaniards in 1770, each of the more than 60 tribes had an estimated 400 to 600 members. Men and women had different roles in Yokuts' culture. Typically, women gathered, took care of the house, and looked after the children while men hunted, fished, and built. Divorce was easy to obtain and could be granted for a variety of reasons, such as infertility, infidelity, or laziness. The Yokuts used singing, painting, and music as forms of artistic expression. The Yokuts used basketry as a means of showcasing their artistic abilities by incorporating images and designs into the baskets. Tattoos and body piercings were among the other ways the Yokuts expressed themselves. The Yokuts participated in two significant religious rituals, the first fruit rite and the yearly mourning rite. The Yokuts valued shamans because they were thought to possess supernatural abilities, assist in conducting ceremonies, and heal the ill. Shamans could, however, use their power for either good or evil, and their execution was contingent on their use. From the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta, the Delta, to Bakersfield and the nearby foothills of the Sierra Nevada mountain range to the east, the San Joaquin Valley was home to Yokuts tribes. Before white settlers drove the Yokuts tribes away, Tulare Lake served as a hub for their population. Most of the Yokuts were killed or forcibly relocated by settlers in 1858 or 1859 as part of the ethnic cleansing of Tulare Lake. After thousands of cattle were killed by severe floods in 1861 and 1867, settlers asked for more dams to be built on Tulare Lake's inflows. Large quantities of cattle and hogs were transported from the mainland to Skull Island via the Mose Andros between 1875 and 1877. The Tulare Lake Archipelago is thought to have been home to the last independent indigenous people in the 1870s. Yoemut described how white colonists brought cattle to the island and then drove the native population away. Some white men brought cattle to the island while we were at Chalawin. They drove them across from the east because the water was low. Hogs were already present, but they were untamed. We started having problems as soon as the white people realized we were there. We were worried that the white people would burn us out because the tools were drying up. So we all went out. Tejon Ranch is where my mother and stepfather took us. In his brother's small wagon, we traveled. Some tribes lived in the western foothills of the Coast Range in the northern half of the Yokuts region. There is evidence that the Yokuts lived on the Carrizo Plain and painted the Painted Rock region. The Yokutsan languages belong to the Panusian language family, according to San Diego State University. Yokuts hunted a wide range of local animals, including game birds, waterfowl, rabbits, turtles, different fish, mussels, and wasp grubs, using spears, basket traps, and other tools. Hunting of big game, such as antelope, elk, and deer, was less common. They collected tula roots and iris bulbs to make flour, but their main source of food was acorn mash. members of four linguistically related Native American groups who are native to what is now Northern California, the Miwok, also spelled Miwok, Miwok, or Miwok, historically spoke one of the Miwok languages in the Utian family. People who speak the Miwok languages are referred to as Miwok. The Miwok are typically separated into four ethnic subgroups by geography and culture by anthropologists. Prior to European contact, the Miwok did not use these distinctions. Plains and Sierra Miwok, from the Sacramento Valley, San Joaquin Valley, Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta Coast, and the western slope and foothills of the Sierra Nevada Miwok, from where Marin County and southern Sonoma County are now, including the Marin Miwok and Bodega Bay Miwok. Bay Miwok, from the current location of Contra Costa County. Lake Miwok, from the Clear Lake Basin of Lake County. Anthropologist Otto von Sadowski asserts that the Miwok and some other Northern California tribes are descended from Siberians who came to California by sea some 3,000 years ago, despite the prevailing theory about the Americas settlement dating the first migrations from Asia to the Bering Strait land bridge some 20,000 years ago. Before coming into contact with European Americans in 1769, the Miwok lived in small bands with no centralized political authority. Although they were hunter-gatherers, they had cultivated tobacco and tamed dogs. The California black oak provided the Sierra Miwok with acorns. In fact, Miwok tribe's cultivation has contributed to the current size of California black oak forests in some parts of Yosemite National Park. To lower the percentage of ponderosa pine, they burned understory vegetation. Almost all other edible vegetable matter, such as seeds, fungi, and bulbs, was utilized as food. Depending on the species and the circumstance, hunters used arrows, clubs, or snares to hunt animals. For those communities along the Stanislaus River, grasshoppers and mussels were highly valued food sources. In addition to diving for abalone in the Pacific Ocean, the coastal Miwok were known to have primarily subsisted on food collected from the inland side of the Marin Peninsula, which includes lakes, modern-day San Pablo Bay, and land-based foods. Instead of eating at set times, the Miwok ate what they felt like. They mostly used baskets with a flat bottom to store food for later use. Generally speaking, the Miwok creation story and narratives are comparable to those of other Northern California natives. The totem animals of the Miwok were associated with one of two moieties, which were correspondingly linked to the land and the water. These totem animals were viewed as predecessors rather than as the actual ancestors of humans. Native Americans known as the Mono, No, have historically resided in the Mono Basin, the Eastern Sierra, usually south of Bridgeport, the Central Sierra Nevada, and neighboring Great Basin regions. Although they are related within the Numic group of Uto-Aztecan languages, they do not constitute a single, distinct, unified group of Great Basin tribes, despite the fact that they are frequently grouped under the historical label Paiute, along with the Northern Paiute and Southern Paiute. The town of North Fork, thus the name North Fork Mono, in Madera County, is now home to a large number of the Mono tribe's descendants and tribal citizens. The Mono tribe is also dispersed throughout California, particularly in the San Francisco Bay Area, the Owens River Valley, and the San Joaquin Valley and foothills regions, particularly Fresno County. Based roughly on the Sierra Crest, the Mono people, who inhabited both sides of the Sierra Nevada, are separated into two regional tribal dialect groups. Mono in the east, along the Owens River, Wacope, and south to Owens Lake, Pacheta. The southernmost northern Paiute reside in the Owens Valley, Mono, Payanad, Payahunadu, place land of flowing water, on the eastern side of the Sierra Nevada on the California-Nevada border. The Owens Valley Paiute is another name for them. The North Fork Mono, as named by E.W. Gifford, an ethnographer who studied people near the San Joaquin River in the 1910s, is part of the Western Mono on the west side in the south-central foothills of the Sierra Nevada. However, the Owens Valley Paiutes were hereby designated as the southernmost northern Paiute band living around Owens Lake, Mono Lake, as Monarchy, Monoake, fly people, because fly larvae were their primary food staple and trading article, and not the Mono. The current tribal name Mono is a Yokutsan loanword from the tribe's western neighbors, the Yokuts. As a holdover from early anthropological literature, this Kukudikati Northern Paiute band is also known as Mono Lake Paiute or Owens Valley Paiute, which translates to eaters of the brine fly pupae. They are frequently mistaken for the non-Northern Paiute ethnic group of the Western Mono Mono. The Western Mono called themselves Nimi Nimi or Nim Niam, people. A full-blooded Western Mono person was called Kawu Nihmi. The Eastern Mono called themselves Numa Numu or Numu, people, in their Mono-Bannock language dialect, and to their relatives to the west as Pananwidu, Panawitu, Western Place people. Together with the Northern Paiute language, a dialect continuum, the Eastern Mono speak the Mono-Bannock dialect, which together make up the Western Numic branch of the Uto-Aztecan language family. Two very different dialects that are hard to understand one another have developed over time as a result of the geographical distance and interactions with nearby tribes and peoples, including the use of loanwords and/or frequent bilingualism. One of the Mono people's native languages is called Nim, Mu Ahu Boso, Mun Ahu Num. Hello to my friends is one way to translate Munahu Tuohun no Pate. Hi there, Mono people. Greetings to everyone worldwide. Many of the Tuba-Tulabal are members of the Tule River Indian tribe today. They are descendants of the Uto-Aztecan language group, who split from the Shoshone approximately 3,000 years ago. They may have been the first people to settle permanently in the Kern River Valley in the Sierra Nevada range of California. Including the Kern and South Fork Kern River drainages, found in the Kern Valley region of California, the Tuba-Tulabal's ancestral homelands covered an area of 1,300 square miles, 3,400 square meters, extending from extremely high mountainous terrain in the north to roughly 41 miles, 66 kilometers, below the junction of the two rivers in the south. The northern highlands, which range from 2,500 to 14,500 feet, 760 to 4,420 meters, are dotted with meadows and lakes. With hot summers and cold, rainy winters, the southern region, 2,500 to 3,000 feet, 760 to 910 meters, is divided into three interconnected valleys: Kern Valley, South Fork Kern Valley, and Hot Springs Valley. There are some Joshua trees, junipers, piñons, oaks, and sugar pines among the primary vegetation in the valleys, which are grasslands and chaparral with cacti, scrub oaks, willows, elderberries, and cottonwoods. Three different bands, collectively known as Tuba-Tulabal, have called the Kern River Valley home. Tuba-Tulabal, which means a people that go to the forest to gather tubat, piñon nuts, can be roughly translated as pine nut eaters. The Yokuts, who lived nearby, gave the tribe that name. The Yokuts also referred to the Tuba-Tulabals as Pitanisha, the location where the rivers split at one point in time. The Indian name for the river's North Fork is Paleguanap, which translates to place of the big river. On the other hand, the South Fork of the river was dubbed Kuchibichwanap Palap, which translates to place of the little river. From west to east, the Tuba-Tulabal tribe is divided into the following three bands. They are classified as an intermediate group because Bankalachi, Pongalach, or Toloim Tulamni lived in the Greenhorn Mountains, and from Poso Creek and Poso Flats around Glenville, California, north along Cedar Creek, White River to Deer Creek, and occasionally farther up along the South Fork Tula River, which is the territory of the Tula River Yokuts. They also practiced extensive exogamy marriages with the Foothill Yokuts, Tula River and Poso Creek Yokuts. The northern group, known as Bankalachi or Baknanuiad, is frequently regarded as Foothill Yokuts, while the southern group is known as Kumakasi. Tulamni or Toloim, a southwestern group frequently associated with the Buena Vista Yokuts Tulamni Band. Pipewan, Little Kern River, North Fork Kern River, south through Kern River Canyon to Hot Springs Valley, Lake Isabella, and the Kern River down to Bakersfield, California, and Paconopil, Baconopil, and Tuba-Tulabal proper, from Mount Whitney south along the South Fork Kern River to Lake Isabella, around Onyx, California, and Weldon, California, to Ridgecrest, California near Walker Pass. The Yokuts, who inhabited the majority of the southern half of the Central Valley in California, shared a similar traditional culture with the Tuba-Tulabal. Piñon nuts, game animals, and acorns were essential components of Tuba-Tulabal's subsistence. The tribe, situated in the Kern Valley, was in contact with the Poso Creek Yokuts to the southwest and the Tulakawea Yokuts to the west. Additionally, to the north and east, They had contact with Western and Southern Numic-speaking groups, Western and Eastern Mono, and Timbisha, Panamint. The Kawaiisu lived on their southern border, and the Tuba-Tulabal had connections to the Kitanamuk, Serrano, and Tataviam, Alaklik peoples, who spoke the Takich branch of Uto-Aztecan further south. The Tuba-Tulabal played an important role as intermediaries and participants in the trade networks that linked the coastal groups, the Central Valley, the southern deserts, and the Great Basin. Tuba-Tulabal enjoyed greater privilege and status than other tribes in the Sierra Nevada. Despite the tribe's traditional patriarchal culture, women were given equal decision-making authority. Women were allowed to use birth control, and marriage had to be mutually agreed upon. Tuba-Tulabal, their ancestral language, is a member of the Uto-Aztecan language family. As of right now, the Uto-Aztecan family's linguistics is categorized as a separate branch. Despite being unquestionably a member of the Uto-Aztecan stock, Tuba-Tulabal is not closely related to other Uto-Aztecan languages. The Tuba-Tulabal most frequently ended in consonants, in contrast to the related languages. To indicate their position within the family and their relationship to the deceased, they employed unique names and suffixes. The dialects, Bancalachi and Pacanil, are spoken by Tuba-Tulabal. The Pacanil dialect is taught by the Tuba-Tulabal tribe's Pacanapo language program in Mountain Mesa, California. James Andreas, who passed away in 2009, was the last person to speak the Pacanil dialect fluently. He resided in Weldon, California, on the Miranda allotment. For the past 10 years, James Andreas has been teaching the Pacanil dialect to the Pacanapo language team. Although the Bancalachi and Pacanil dialects are similar, not much is known about the former. The Santa Lucia Range and the southern Salinas Valley on California's central coast are the ancestral lands of the Salinan, a Native American tribe. The Bureau of Indian Affairs is currently assisting the Salinan governments in their efforts to obtain federal tribal recognition. There was one subgroup and two main divisions. Near the future locations of Mission San Antonio de Padua and Mission San Miguel Arcangel, the Antonianos resided in the lower portion of the Salinas Valley, which runs south to north. The Miguelino inhabited the upper Salinas River and the areas south of Junipero Serra Peak, Soledad, and Slates Hot Springs. On the Pacific coast, near what are now Lucia and San Simeon, there was also a Playano subgroup. Like the majority of California tribes, the Salinans were hunter-gatherers who were arranged in small groups with minimal centralized government. They were abundant along the coast, as evidenced by the shell middens they left behind. The fine shell particles found several feet down in the soil where the Indians camped indicate that fish and shellfish were their primary summer food sources. The peak was called Pimcolam by the Salinans. Said until the 1950s, the Salinan language is an isolated language. It might belong to the family of Hokan languages. Along with Chumash and Seri, Sapir placed it in a subfamily of Hokan. Although this classification has been included in more recent encyclopedias and language family presentations, there has never been any solid proof to support it. The pre-contact populations of the majority of California's native groups have been estimated to have varied widely. According to Alfred L. Kroeber, there were 3,000 people living in the Salinan in 1770. According to Sherburne F. Cook's estimation, there were at least 700 Salinans. According to the United States Census of 2000, there were 681 Salinans in total. Native to the Santa Lucia Mountains, in a region south of the Big Sur River in California, the Esselen are a Native American people who belong to a linguistic group in the hypothetical Hokan language family. They lived seasonally on the coast and inland before the Spanish arrived, subsisting on the abundant seafood in the summer and acorns and wildlife in the winter. When Esselen children left their villages and moved as families to live in the missions during California's mission era, the priests baptized them and taught them various trades, reading, and writing. The three neighboring missions, Mission San Carlos, Mission Nuestra Señora de la Soledad, and Mission San Antonio de Padua, all required the Esselen to work. They suffered from malnutrition, forced labor, overwork, torture, and diseases to which they lacked a natural defense, as did many other Native American communities. They used to be among California's smallest Native American communities. Between 500 and 1,285 people, according to different experts, lived in the rocky, steep area when the Spanish arrived. They were probably among the first, whose culture was essentially eradicated as a result of European contact and dominance because of their closeness to 3 Spanish missions. In the early and late 1800s, some tribal members left the forest to work on neighboring ranches, despite the belief that the people had been wiped out. Although they are now dispersed, many Esselen descendants still reside in the Monterey Peninsula and the surrounding areas. Before the Ohlone people moved in, the original people's territory stretched much further north into the San Francisco Bay Area, according to linguistic and archaeological evidence. Richard Livy dates the displacement to approximately the year 500 AD based on linguistic evidence. Based on a number of lines of evidence, Breschini and Haversat placed the arrival of Ohlone speakers in the Monterey region before 200 BC. The Esselen have been in the Big Sur since about 2630 BCE, according to carbon dating of sites that have been excavated. Coastal Esselen territory in the Big Sur River drainage, however, has recently provided researchers with a radiocarbon date that predates 600 and 500 years ago. A language isolate is the Esselen language. In theory, it belongs to the Hokan family. The northern Santa Lucia Range was home to speakers of the language. There were 500 to 1,000 speakers before they came into contact with European culture. 22 words were noted by French explorer Jean Laperouse during his 1786 visit to Monterey. While on the expedition, he wrote in his journal, "More than 20 leagues to the southeast of Monterey is the country of the Eclamacs, Esselen. Their language is completely distinct from all of their neighbors' languages, and it even resembles European languages more than American ones. Those of the learned who are interested in the history and genealogy of transplanted nations may find this grammatical phenomenon, which is the most peculiar in this regard ever seen on the continent, intriguing. Small coastal creeks and sporadic tiny beaches break up the high, steep cliffs and rocky shores that characterize the Central California coast. Narrow canyons and rough terrain characterize the mountains. The terrain limits the size of the native population, makes the area relatively inaccessible, and makes long-term habitation difficult. The Salinan people, who lived in what is now southern Monterey County, southern San Benito County, and northern San Luis Obispo County, were neighbors of the tribe. 3 Esselen geopolitical districts are thought to have existed: Amunahan, which included the central Arroyo Seco watershed, Excelen, which included the upper Carmel River, and Equiahan, which included the upper Arroyo Seco and Big Sur River watersheds, as well as a portion of the Big Sur coast farther south between Posts and Big Creek. The Esselen lived along the Big Sur coast from close to what is now Hurricane Point to the area around Vicente Creek in the south, as well as along the upper Carmel and Arroyo Seco rivers. As far as the Salinas Valley, the Esselen's domain stretched inland through the Santa Lucia Mountains. They were hunter-gatherers who lived in small communities without a centralized political authority before the Spanish arrived. According to contemporary scholars, Excelen, originally called Costanoans, from the Spanish costeño, which means coast dweller. The Ohlone, Ohlone, are a Native American tribe that lives along the coast of Northern California. The Ohlone lived along the coast from San Francisco Bay through Monterey Bay to the lower Salinas Valley when Spanish explorers and missionaries arrived in the late 18th century. They spoke a number of related languages at the time. The Utian language family includes the Ohlone languages as a subfamily. While more recent proposals group Utian as Yok-Utian, older ones place it in the Penutian language phylum. The Ohlone did not see themselves as a single, cohesive group in pre-colonial times, as they were divided into over 50 different landholding groups. In keeping with the ethnographic pattern of California, they subsisted on hunting, fishing, and gathering. These different bands, members freely engaged with each other. The Kuksu religion was practiced by the Ohlone people. Northern California was one of the most densely populated areas north of Mexico before the gold rush. But when Spanish colonists arrived in the region in 1769, tribal life was drastically altered. With the intention of converting the indigenous people and culture to Christianity, the Spanish built missions along the California coast. The number of indigenous Californians fell from 300,000 to 250,000 between 1769 and 1834. The Greater California Genocide affected the Ohlone after California joined the Union in 1850. There has been a renewed push in recent years to acknowledge their tribe's history and culture, as well as the things that have been taken from them. Today's Ohlone are members of several geographically separate groups, the majority of which remain in their ancestral homeland, though not all of them are federally recognized tribes. The term Costanoan was first used by British ethnologist Robert Gordon Latham to describe the linguistically similar but ethnically diverse Native American tribes in the San Francisco Bay Area. First identified as Ohlones or Costanos in 1850, the term was derived from the name of a group of Ramaytush speakers in the Mission Dolores area. According to the former, the majority of ethnographers, historians, and popular literature authors have adopted the term Ohlone after American anthropologist Clinton Hart Merriam called the Costanoan groups Ohlonian in his posthumously published field notes at the beginning of the 20th century. Because historical knowledge is limited, researchers are cautious not to lump all Ohlone people's religious and spiritual beliefs into one cohesive worldview. Cultural groups are working as ethnographers to learn more about their ancestry and what it reveals about them as a group, because Indians were uprooted from their homes in the missions between 1769 and 1833. Depending on the band being discussed, their religion varies, but they all share some aspects of their worldview. Because historical knowledge is limited, researchers are cautious not to lump all Ohlone people's religious and spiritual beliefs into one cohesive worldview.